There is a lot of content to explore in the first few episodes of Chief of War. Jason Momoa, the creator, writer, and director of Chief of War, is in charge of the actors. Because of its in-depth examination of Hawaiian history, the series has been Jason Momoa's long-term, personal passion project. The show takes place during the beginning of the 18th century, when the Western world was starting to establish a lasting effect and distinct monarchs and chiefs governed the islands of Hawaii. Although the series heavily relies on the real-world historical setting of Chief of War, the intentions of the protagonists in the first 2 episodes are easily understood. Jason Momoa portrays famous war chief Kahekili, a man divided between his passion for peace and his obligation as a warrior. Prior to delving into the confrontation with King Kahekili, Temuera Morrison, in Episode 1, it is necessary to address the main cliffhanger from the first few episodes. Kahekili makes a last stand on an oceanside cliff after being injured and chasing throughout the island by Kahekili's soldiers for the majority of the episode. It's hard to get more badass than this. Several of his opponents are brutally and epically killed by Kahekili until he is overwhelmed by several attackers. Kahekili ultimately decides to take the only feasible course of action, which is to leap off the cliff and plunge into the water. He has achieved his goal, as his family has already set ship for the island of Hawaii. The English sailing ship, whose crew he had met and rescued earlier in the episode, is then hauled out of the water. When Kahekili wakes up, he discovers that the ship is leaving the Hawaiian Islands and that he is now in their hands. The actual Kahekili was documented in history as a traveler on the fur trader Captain John Muir's ship, which he took to China, the Philippines, and other places. They consent to an invasion of Oahu on the supposition that Kahekili and his family will sneak in and kill a priest to end the conflict before full-scale carnage actually breaks out, but it turns out that forces on Oahu weren't actually plotting, and that Kahekili used this as a pretext to subjugate and slaughter political rivals. Following a bloody skirmish, Kahekili seizes control of Oahu, but not before infuriating both Kahekili and his son, Prince Kupule, Brandon Finn, who are incensed at his lies. Episode 2 provides additional insight into Kahekili's motivations, revealing that this is all related to his interpretation of the prediction. The foretold monarch might simply be a dictator prepared to carry out unimaginable deeds in order to fortify the nation, according to Kahekili, who is pushing matters into his own hands rather than letting the prophecy unfold organically. In essence, he is using prophecy as a pretext to use violence to gain control. Kahumanu, Lucien Buchanan, is King Kahekili's niece and the daughter of a chief named Moku, Moses Goods. In order to prevent Kahekili from disrupting the border, Moku chooses to marry Kahumanu to a chief in Hawaii and plans to bring his daughter and wife there shortly. Kahumanu refuses to get married and is obstinate about these traditions. After telling Kahekili that she has a new life waiting for her in Hawaii, Kahumanu invites him to accompany her in search of safety. Rather, Kahekili tells her to take his family there for protection while he guides Kahekili's men away from them. Before leaving, Kahumanu deviates from tradition by letting a British sailor who has been marooned go with them. Kahumanu receives a powerful prophecy from Tala, the seer, on the beach earlier in the episode, explaining that her actions will cause her people to be destroyed. She asks if she will be content with her new spouse, but the seer tells her that there is only one way to achieve freedom. Tala's assertion that the gods fear Kahumanu is further supported by the episode's conclusion, in which Kahumanu's reception of a British sailor marks the beginning of the end. As previously mentioned, the ship Kahekili ultimately finds himself on is in Hawaii for exploratory purposes, but we know what this leads to with history in mind. Hawaii is, of course, a U.S. state today, but this wouldn't happen until 1959, more than a century and a half after the events of this series. A British man traveling with Hawaiians and a Hawaiian as a British traveler at the episode's conclusion represent an impending cultural conflict. Beginning with the Western impact we are beginning to observe, we trace the history of Hawaii from its state as chief of war to the present. A British man traveling with Hawaiians and a Hawaiian as a British traveler at the episode's conclusion represent an impending cultural conflict. Although colonialism will start to bury its roots, we will witness Hawaii growing into a single nation throughout Chief of War. As a result, decades after the events of the show, Hawaii would eventually become U.S. territory.